Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe to our channel.
Welcome to the 777 Prayer and Health Ministries, a global movement without walls or borders, where Jesus Christ is exalted as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We exist for the threefold purpose of education, proclamation, and holistic health promotion. Join us daily at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we pray, praise, and ground our faith on the sure promises of God.
Pleasant evening and welcome to the 777 Prayer and Health Ministries, a global movement without walls or borders where Jesus Christ is exalted as King of Kings and Lord of all Lords. We welcome you to what we call the Table of Grace. It's an opportunity where individuals from all walks of life, we can gather together to fellowship, to learn, to grow, and to thrive in community. We are so excited that you join us for this Black History Month special as we'll be focusing on grief, a subject matter that has touched every last one of us. I will be your facilitator for this evening's session. My name is Desmond Hay, and I am super excited to be with you. If this is your first time, we welcome you. If this is your first time after a long time, we welcome you. And for those who have regularly sit with us at the table of grace on Sunday evenings, we are so delighted that you are in the room. If your friends aren't in the room as yet, and if they're joining us via YouTube, we also want to welcome them to this wonderful session as we learn and grow together in community. May I pray with you as we begin this evening's session? Gracious God, we are so thankful to you for your loving kindness and the multitudes of your tender mercies. We thank you for this gathering. We thank you for those who are logging in and for those who will join us via YouTube for this broadcast. We praise your name for our presenter tonight, and we thank you that no matter what's happening around us, we can still trust in the omnipotent God. Tonight, I pray in a very special way that you would give the wind a mighty voice, that you are faithful, that you are true, and that you save. I pray that you'd remind your people that you're with us in our times of trials, in our times of adversity. I ask now that you'd bless this session, bless the presenter, and bless every person in this room who will participate in this most important session, is my prayer. Amen and amen. Tonight, as we gather together at the table of grace, I am so excited to welcome to the table someone that I've come to know and respect over the years, a tremendous person who loves God, is a professional at what she does, and I am just thrilled to have her at the table tonight. I speak of none other than Rashida Sanchez. She's a licensed master social worker. She is a grief therapist, bereavement specialist. She's a wife and a mother, a Christian communicator, an exceptional provider of support for those who are journeying through the most difficult times in their lives. I could tell you a whole host about her. She has Haitian background. We met many years ago when I served in the Northeast, and our relationship has just been strong over the years. And I'm so grateful when I was asked by the team to find someone to come and talk about the important subject of grief and the church. I thought of none other than Rashida Sanchez. This evening is going to be an amazing encounter. You will learn a lot, and this is how the session will flow. Rashida will come after the introduction. She will share her presentation. After the presentation, we will entertain questions from you out there, the live audience, those who are on YouTube or Facebook. We want to hear your questions. So if you have questions, you can type those in the chat, or you will be given the opportunity to use the raise hand feature here in Zoom to ask a question and to personally interact with Rashida. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Black History Month special here on the 777 Prayer and Health Ministries. And we're delighted to welcome to the table of grace Rashida Sanchez to speak to us on the subject matter of grief and the church. Good evening, Rashida. Good to see you. Delighted to have you on the program this evening.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much for sending the invitation to you and the team, Pastor. Hey, it has been, just wonderful. As you have said, our many years of knowing each other and your lovely wife and son. I bring them greetings, and to everyone whom is with us here virtually. I welcome you into this space as well. I never take for granted, even when we are meeting virtually, that it's a sacrifice. Individuals are taking the time to log on, to get online, to spend this moment together. And I love the idea of a table, right? Not only is it a table of grace, which adds extra icing to it, but a table is where we meet. Right? It's where we have meals together. It's where we chat. It's where individuals share. And what you have said in the introduction is so important, especially the part where I get to hear from you and get to have your questions. I have been in this work of grief, bereavement for many, many years, over a decade now. And I am always so grateful to be with individuals, walking alongside of them in this most vulnerable time. But it is always important to me not to just hear my voice, right? I can hear my voice all day and do hear it all day, but to give you all the opportunity to write your questions. So please, as something is coming up to mind, you can write it then and there. If it's something that I can speak to in the moment, then I will do so by answering it. And if it's something that would be better for our question and answer portion, then we'll go ahead and leave it for that. So let me just share my presentation, which I will just do so. And while I am grabbing that, I want to say right from the very beginning, Happy Black History Month to you all. It is actually the 100th year of celebrating Black history. Of course, we've been on this earth since the very beginning, but it's wonderful to be recognized and to be at the table, especially thinking about Black history. So we're going to be speaking about the topic of grief and the church just for a moment, just an overview. So passionate about the grief work. So it's always just an overview. I can go on and on, but I'm so glad that this subject matter was chosen for today and you are here learning a bit more about it. I never begin a lecture without speaking to the definitions, right? Setting a foundation. I think that sometimes we have an idea of what grief may be. Many of us have experienced grief. I always say if you live long enough, you will experience grief. But it's so important to have a foundation of what it means when we're clinically speaking and talking about grief, right? It is the subjective set of responses to a loss. And when you're looking at your screen and when you're thinking of that definition, I want you to just remember the word response, right? That is key. That is important. That is going to help us sort of debunk a lot of myths that you hear about grief and what's right and what's wrong and how long it should be. Because when you think about response, it really is purposely supposed to be open. Right? You're supposed to not have it boxed in with just a physical response or emotional response, right? It leaves room for a full spectrum of what grief is supposed to look like. And it is unique and it changes through individuals, right? Grief can show up physically, as I said, right? You can feel headaches, you can feel a tightness in your chest, you can feel sweaty palms, you can feel a racing heartbeat. Those are some of the ways where it can show up physically. Some individuals have gastrointestinal issues. And for those of you who have dealt with grief before, you may know that feeling of not wanting to eat, right? Not feeling even that you can eat and just eating just simply for nutrition's sake or drinking for nutrition's sake, but really not taking pleasure in wanting to eat and feeling like something is on your chest. Cognitive responses like forgetting things, not being able to remember your tasks, forgetting appointments, social changes happen, not wanting to hang out with individuals or be just engaged with friends and family like you used to be. So on and on and on are the many changes, which includes spiritual changes. And like I said, I'm so grateful that we're able to speak about grief today because often, although we know that grief exists, we don't speak about it as much in the church world, in the world of Christianity. We see grief as something that we know exists and we have a desire to support, but sometimes things get lost in the midst of wanting to support. So it is important that we know what grief is. I also want to point out to you what is mourning, right? If grief was a response to loss, then the important word to remember here is expression. Expression. And again, so unique. We do this in a variety of different ways, right? You, if I'm holding this to you now, as you are listening, you express deep sorrow. How do you outwardly um, express within your culture and within your community or within just your family system? How do you express that you are mourning, that something has shifted, whether death-related loss or non-death-related loss has happened? What are your cultural practices, rituals? What do you do publicly? A lot of times when we think about our gatherings, maybe within the Christian setting, we think about funerals, we think about memorial services, we think about gathering together for repast, we think about home visits, and the different ways in which we mourn, right? So again, grief is the response to loss, and mourning is that expression, what you see outwardly, right? Which may even be expressed in our dress. I know in my own culture, depending on who dies, sometimes you will wear the color black for a certain period of time. Again, depending on the relationship to the individual, just as a word expression that someone has died in your life. This is the tip of the iceberg of some of the things that impact grief. And I want you again to take note. Has any of these things impacted you? And what has your grief timeline look like if you are just thinking of the losses and counting them and taking stock of what they are? They may have presented themselves differently depending on where you were in your own life, right? Depending on your beliefs. You may feel a capacity or a resilience, or you may feel that you are able to deal with certain aspects of grief stressors, maybe at one point in life over another. There's the role that the deceased individual played in your life, right? Was the relationship quite close? Was it complicated? Was it something where you spoke with the individual every single day, or were there opportunities to be at tables together with that individual, doing activities with them, or was there a bit of physical or geographical distance, right? What role did they play in supporting you, or maybe a lack of support? Now, grief is not based, like sometimes you would hear individuals say. We clinically cannot say grief is just based on a measure of love, right? Again, we want to make sure that we think about that response, because perhaps even if someone was not so close to you, or the relationship was complicated, or something was happening between you and the individual that you cannot just quite pinpoint, or you would not maybe call it a deep love, you can still be a grieving individual, one whom is thinking about how that loss has impacted you, right? Death surround. What was going on in the moment, right? What was happening with the family in your life? What other stressors exist? Is work successful for you? Is it not? The age at which the person died, your own personal age. We'll talk a little about disenfranchised grief later. Family life cycle development. We will talk about some of those things. Attachment style, right? Are you someone who has a dependent attachment style or not? Think about some of those things. How did you grow up? All of those things impact grief. We're setting still our foundation, right? Myths and realities about grief. And these are all myths, right? Because we're assuming the reality is counter that, right? The big myth that grief is predictable. I know that many of us may have grown up hearing about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and hearing about 5 stages of grief and thinking about bargaining and anger and then eventually moving towards acceptance. But that is not what grief really is. As a matter of fact, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was doing research and work with individuals that were dying. And she was thinking and speaking with individuals about they felt as they had a terminal diagnosis and they were approaching the date of death. And being that her work was so popular, that was taken and then applied to grief, that after loss process. But this is not the case. I don't think, and I know grief is not a linear process. You're not moving from phase to phase, and you're not moving from point A to point C, right? It is, if you can imagine, not a straight line, but instead think about a ball of yarn, all tangled up. Right. Think about the experience that you have when you're trying to take apart wires and you're trying to find just one string. Right. It's a work where everything is interconnected. So being that things are interconnected and it's not a predictable process, we also have to keep in mind that we're no longer thinking about grief as, you go through these phases and then you accept it and you sort of let go. You're over, you're healed, right? And you are moving past what has happened to you. But instead, we see grief as a process where there are ups and downs, there are waves. It's like a roller coaster, any metaphor that you want to use where there are ups and downs. And it's not about letting go. It's really about moving through. That's what I love to say, moving through and thinking about the loss and thinking about how you yourself are going to work through what was lost and what is left, right? Human beings, from the beginning of time, we have known that death will occur. Every living thing dies, but I never think that it gets easy, right? It never gets easy. Sometimes we find ourselves shocked at the most unexpected things and under circumstances, whatever it may be, we are naturally not resilient to loss. And we have to, think about that even in the case of prolonged illness. Some people will say, oh, well, you knew that was going to happen. There are differences in grief. There are differences in how people die and how we react, but we certainly cannot take away, in saying that one grief process is more important than the other, right? There are only those differences. I want to take the time to also talk about non-death related loss, right? Because often when we think about our communities, our Christian communities or religious communities, and we are thinking about grief, we are only thinking about perhaps the death of an individual, right? We're thinking about that separation. But there are also griefs, again, responses to loss that come from non-death related experiences, like some of the things that you see on your screen: loss of health, loss of work, loss of education opportunities or educational opportunities, loss of routine and connection. If we think just back to 2020 and what we all have been through with COVID-19, the loss of our assumptive world, right? The ways in which we were used to live in, all of a sudden there was a separation and we had to navigate and pivot. And many of us had to make sacrifices with education or with health, news constantly breaking. We have to think about the different ways in which we connected to the people and the things that supported us. We had to think about the ways in which we changed, like collective gatherings and the ability to be together in space, the ability to join at the table. Some things we are grateful for that came out of that time. For example, we became more dependent on virtual gatherings. That was part of a large pivot in our society. But again, when we take stock of many of the non-debt related losses, this is something that is constantly happening within our communities. And sometimes because individuals are not verbally, outwardly stating what is going on, or they do not have a specific dress on, or there's no indicators maybe to the eye that grief is happening, it does not mean that those individuals are any less saddened or any less change or any less in need of support. They are grieving, but often we do not recognize that. So it's so important to be in community, so big on community. And the church is one of the best communities, especially when you are facing loss. But it can be so difficult if you do not know the signs to kind of speak with individuals and to approach them and find out the ways in which you can support them in the ways that they themselves are ready to receive and are appreciative of, if we do not know the various losses that are there. Right? It's not only when an individual has died. That's why it's so important to check in with one another. Secondary losses is not meaning that these losses are any less important. Clinically, we are just pointing out that a primary loss is the death of the person, is what has been lost, person or non-death related or animal, whatever it may be. And the secondary losses are all the ripple effects that come from that. For example, you may experience the death of a parent. That is the primary loss. But everything else that comes from that, did that individual contribute financially to the home? That's a secondary loss. That's a source of income that is no longer there. Did that individual have certain roles? Did they cook for the home? Did they call everyone together for prayer time or for family connection? That is the loss of something socially that used to happen. That is the loss of routine. That is the loss of individuals whom contributed to shared memories. That is the loss of holiday traditions. When you gather and you imagine that individual no longer being there, and there were certain things that they used to do. There may be a loss of security because that parent is no longer there. Actual physical security, but also more of an existential security. When you think about yourself in the world, you feel that something is missing, that individual, in this case, a parent, is no longer there. So those are just some examples of how death and dying is so much deeper than we could have imagined. There are the things that we may readily think about, but there are the things that are so much smaller and exist, that exist from day to day that grievers are dealing with. And those grievers are part of our communities. They may be us, right? We are the community, but they also exist within our churches. So sometimes when we see individuals needing to step away, let's say within a service or, at lunchtime, they are talking and they are ruminating and they are talking about a story. Those are different ways in which those secondary losses show up and which they're able to express themselves. As I said, grief impacts a variety of things, right? And one of the things that it impacts, a secondary loss, is the impact on identity. Now, identity can, have many different layers. It's like pulling back on onion. It can be familial identity. It can be identity at work. It can be the identity, of a role. Just to highlight, two especially that deal with church, two especially that deal with, our topic tonight, spiritual identity. You know, often individuals, especially under the circumstances of a death, we have to make room again for the spectrum of how that person is going to questions of how they are going to approach their faith, the foundational tenets of what they believe. Some people choose to lean deeper into those foundations, and some people choose instead to change the foundation, right? They question purpose. They think about, well, what's happening? If God allowed this to happen, and this has happened right now, and I was not ready for it, or if I was ready for it, why me? Right? Why not the person who is doing evil out there? Right? We have large questions that are asked around death, dying, and grief. Right? And as I said, some people may choose to more deeply lean into their faith, and some people may choose to step away. It does not mean that they're stepping away momentarily. It does not mean that something is wrong with them. But depending on the circumstances, they do have the right to sit, to evaluate, to think about what is going to help and most helpful for them in this moment. And it is the job of the community to support them. We may perhaps disagree. It may not be the way that we would do things, but we have to and we should allow for questions to be raised, and we should allow for exchange of conversation, and we should hopefully support and approach any griever with love, so that they know that there's not a secondary loss where we are concerned, but we are still willing, even as they may struggle with certain questions or aspects of their faith and are asking why, we are there to support them, especially in such a vulnerable time. Some individuals culturally, and the church as a community itself, may feel that they do not have a sense of belonging. They no longer fit. It's too difficult to be there among everyone and not have their spouse partner there with them. So we also have to make room for how people want to change, perhaps going to another community, perhaps going to another church, because it may be too difficult for them to be in that space. I'm just going to take a drink of water. Please excuse me. Disenfranchised grief is so important here, especially when we think about within our cultures, within our church communities, how individuals are overlooked. Kenneth Doka penned this term, disenfranchised grief. And really, what you have to remember is the three things there. It's when a grief relationship is not recognized, the loss is not acknowledged, and the griever is excluded. What are some examples of that? The relationship is not recognized. I have known and had many clients over the years who feel that because of who died, some individuals do not care, right? Maybe that individual was not part of the larger community, so it's not recognized. Maybe that individual, in the case of a parent, died at the, ripe age of 100. And people say, what's their time? Well, whatever it may be. Maybe it was a relationship that should not have really been occurring, right? An extramarital affair, whatever it may be. And no one takes the time to perhaps ask and to say, hey, I may not agree with what is happening, but I want to check on you and your grief. Think about, and don't say Rashida said, oh, these things are allowed, right? But there is a humanness in which we have to approach grief, right? And it touches different individuals with many different kinds of relationships, right? A lie is not right? But if someone is lying and facing a problem, etc., we want to show up with them. We want to say, hey, how can I help you? In the same fashion, we want to be able to show up for grievers, no matter whom died, right? We want to say, hey, as a community, how can we help? How can we aid you? We never know how we are representing God in recognizing that someone is working through loss, right? The loss isn't acknowledged, right? Sometimes, we think, that's not as important, right? For example, we may hear that a coworker has died, or we may think about a health professional who is talking about their grief and is continually dealing with a lot of debts, right? And the response for someone caring maybe, hey, it's the career that you chose. What do you want me to do about it, right? Instead of really creating the space for that person and saying, what's going on? How can I help? How can I be a listening ear with what is happening? The griever is excluded. And we really have to be mindful of that. I often see this, the others as well, but I often see this, especially in our communities, when we're thinking about getting to come into that table, right? Sometimes we only think about it as being an adult table. We don't think about how children are grieving, how they are processing. Or we do not think of their grief as something that is evolving, like our adult grief may be evolving. So at the beginning, we are hovering, we are really worried, we are looking for signs. But when they are able to go to school or maybe able to play with friends or able to attend to their activities, we say to ourselves, okay, everything is great. We treat the children with often the same measuring stick that we treat each other. Functioning does not mean that grief is not there, right? And we also have to think about, in the same aspect that we may exclude young children and teenagers, that we do not exclude our elderly. We do not exclude those who are mentally ill. We do not exclude those who have special needs, because oftentimes we just barrel through with what we want to do and how we want to remember individuals without asking the opinions of those persons. It's also important to keep in mind that anticipatory grief, even before a death has occurred, right? Who in our community may be in example, a caregiving position? Who in our community may be caring for someone whom is dealing with dementia, right? Where aspects of that individual, aspects of their mind and memories are being lost. The physical body is there, or we are anticipating someone working through an illness, and they've received bad news, and we have the fear that the loss is happening, but no one is asking questions because the person is there. We're not as mindful that grief is happening within those households, right? Ambiguous loss is much of the same thing. Someone may have a family member whom is incarcerated. Someone may be working through and dealing with a family member who is deployed in the military, right? Where the person is physically absent, they're not there. And there's worry and there's loss with dealing with that. So we think about those things, and I hope that our intention is to incorporate those things into those ways in which we view grief and also view our response to grief. So when we don't think about these things and we don't want to talk about them, and we want to approach people maybe on surface level, we build a stigma. We are now adhering to taboos, and the definitions are there. And I want you to think, free am I to talk about death, dying, grief before it happens, right? Am I engaging in conversation where I am able to talk about what I want, if I am ill, or if I have died? Am I able to talk about how I want my family to move through their grief? Is it something, and we all have it, right? Whatever cultures we are from. Is it something where it's like, shh, we do not talk about death? To talk about death is to invite it in, right? And sometimes we do ourselves a disservice, depending on what answers came to mind. We do ourselves a great disservice when there are topics that we, want to move away from, in the vein of Black History Month. When I think about so many of our Black cultures and Black descendants, and don't get me wrong, there are so many cultures that are free and open, especially in speaking about death and thinking about rituals and thinking about how to memorialize people. But where we may have weakness is when it comes to those one-on-one conversations about emotion. Where we have a weakness sometimes is after that individual is in the grave, after everyone has gone home, how we show up for one another and we think about grief. Sometimes we see individuals functioning, we check after them for a while, but in our minds, hey, it's been a year. They are no longer impacted around holiday times. It's been several years. They have another child. They're not thinking about that miscarriage or that stillbirth. And we don't recognize how, again, grief stays with individuals. And oftentimes, we are not the ones who is bringing it to mind for the person. They are thinking about it. They are experiencing the grief. It may not be present with them all day, every day, but at certain points, there are memories that trigger them. There are things that they may be seeing with the progression of their life and in others' life that may have them thinking, wow, I wonder what this person would be doing, or what I would say to them, or what they would say to me. So we are not bringing it to someone's mind, the idea of grief. In essence, what we are doing and not bringing up is oftentimes what my clients say. They feel like their person is forgotten because people are not willing to bring up their name or talk about how they were impacted by them or willing to share stories about them. Yes, it may bring up sadness, but irretrospectively, it can bring great joy to be able to speak about the individual that died. This quote, nothing to our spiritual leaders, but they are the shepherds who are leading the local churches, right? So this quote was taken from the National Institute of Mental Health, and it says that fewer than 10% of people who are seeking counsels from pastors and lay professionals, for mental health, issues or mental health symptoms, fewer than 10% of them are referred, right? And I know that some of us may have stories, and we may be thinking about a family member who may be dealing with, or even if ourselves are dealing with various issues, and sometimes we are seeking for more, right? Our pastors, our spiritual leaders, our elders, our prayer warriors are most certainly capable of wrestling with us and standing in the gap for us, where it comes to spiritually uplifting us and studying the word with us and providing help. But sometimes there is not a furthering of that help, right? There isn't the stop point of saying, hey, I encourage you to go speak to a mental health professional. I encourage you to think about how you are dealing with grief. And I encourage you in this season to join a support group or to be with other grievers. Or it is something that I am doing for the congregation or for the small group where we're going to be talking about specific issue that has to do with mental health, and in this case, grief, right? So many of us are stopping prematurely at the aid in which we could be offering individuals. That's why it's so important that the church really stands in that space and isn't just about what the talents and gifts are amidst just ourselves, right? But we are in community with others. We are in community with professionals in various fields, right? I would say the same thing if someone needed a nutritionist, if someone wanted to make a lifestyle change, if someone was struggling with a diagnosable mental health illness, right? Or just thinking about stress, how are we connected with professionals in whatever realm so that we can help one another and pray for one another? So questions that, as someone who's in more of the clinical space, when individuals are coming to me and they are thinking about exploring meaning, they are exploring or trying to explore faith, these are some of the things that I would explore with them. But I chose these questions to include here because they are also things in which we can ask one another. It doesn't necessarily take a degree, a professional degree, to speak to individuals whom are grieving and say, hey, of course, after a time, these questions are not necessarily appropriate. These are not the questions when you're visiting someone in the first weeks of their grief, and you're speaking to them, and you're asking them, hey, what is important to you now? Grievers and any of us who are grieving, uh, we do not know, right? Well, we are still trying to grapple with the actual practicalities of burying our individual, of putting together services, of how life has changed, thinking about those secondary losses. So we might not be in a mind frame, right? But if you're thinking about someone who's further into their grief, and you want to connect with them, and you want to have conversation and naturally connect with them, and the topic of grief comes up, you may ask questions like, how have you changed? I'm willing to listen, right? What has changed in your life? And being a listener is such an underrated skill, right? Not listening to just respond and to give our spiel of what we think should be said, but instead thinking to what the individual is saying, and responding empathetically, and not just verbally, but also with our body language, showing that we are understanding, or showing that, wow, and admitting, I did not think that change may have existed for you, right? What is bringing meaning to your life right now? What would you like to tell me? What would you like to tell others about your experience? Showing up in that way for individuals and posing these thoughtful questions helps them to feel heard, helps them to feel like, wow, somebody is taking interest, way beyond what society says, a regular grief and coping time is. They are really thinking about how I'm living now and how I am processing and working through my grief. In the vein of how do we show up for individuals, right? Um, Words, if that's how we choose to show up. There are words that harm, and there are words that are helpful. And, this is not to, embarrass anyone, but it's just for us to think thoughtfully about the things that we have said, or, that we want to stop ourselves from saying in the future, that are not necessarily helpful for the griever. And these are grievers who are saying this, it doesn't help me when someone says, I know just how you feel, right? The response often is, no, you don't. That was my person. You did not have the same relationship with them. You don't know just how I feel. And I know sometimes in our efforts to show up empathetically for one another, we want to show like, yes, you experienced the death of a child. I experienced the death of a child. But even when we have the same death relationship, it's better to say, tell me about your person, or this is what I experience, and being mindful, I experience this. Tell me, what do you experience? How have things changed for you, right? Thinking about words like, don't cry, be strong. We may want to encourage that person, but often what they feel is dismissed. They are feeling the pressures to look like they are getting through their grief. They are feeling pressures to feel that they have to like move this machine along and get back to this, to looking like they're functioning, and they really can't express their emotions. So many grievers, desire to break down at certain times during the day. Again, it may not be all day during the day, but they may feel that, and maybe searching for the safe space of where they can show up, where they can just cry and they won't be judged for that. Where somebody will instead say, do you want to talk about it? Or would just be present with them, right? Well, the individual won't say, oh, if only you had, right? Any sentence that starts with, you should feel, or, if only you had, is the wrong way to begin. We do not know the circumstances of anything. We only know, perhaps, sometimes even if we're not in it, we really don't know what we would have done. It's better to say, and to send a text, or to give a call and say, I was thinking about you today. I know it was your brother's birthday. I'm aware it's your spouse's birthday. Tell me a story about them, or let me share a story of how they impacted me. That helps the griever and goes so much further than thinking about the cliche things that we often say that can leave bitter taste in the mouth. As we close, I want you to think about, enfranchising grief, right? And it's a combination of everything that I have shared today in our brief moment together about what the church can do, what we can do as part of the church, right? As people who may be reading through various grief stories that even showed up in the word, we know that God always validated, cared deeply about the human experience. Over and over and over again, we find scriptures like, blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted. God is close to the brokenhearted. He cares. He recognizes. God recognizes that this experience that we are going through of the separation of loss is not one that comes naturally, but it is important to name what is happening with us. There are things in life where we are resilient because we have to be, not because we want to be, right? So while we are applying scripture and while we are praying and while we are speaking to one another, it's important to say, I see you. Share with me what is happening with you, right? And it's not, moving past that. It really is, how can I be present with you in this moment, right? What we cannot name often looms as the big bad scary thing in the background, when we're able to share our stories and people are able to be with one another, and they are able to find that support within Christian settings or religious settings, whatever it may be. They are all the more connected because of it. Right. I always hear the stories, and I know you on the other side of your screen, even now, maybe thinking about the great disappointments of people whom you thought would show up for you in a time of great need and just didn't quite meet the mark. But on the other hand, you think about the people who showed up for you in unexpected ways, the individuals whom sent food, not just in the first 2 weeks, who invited you over to dinner 6 months down the line, a year down the line, the individuals who invited you to be with their family during the holidays, the individuals who sent you a text just because, the individuals who share stories with you, those are the ones whom you remember. And also, as I said in the beginning, I'm so happy to be with you all. This is a combination of grief education, but also an opportunity for you to ask your questions, for us to be in conversation, and for you to hopefully be able to look back on some of these things and just have hopefully a different mind frame of how you can show up and how you will support others in the future. Remember, support is not just verbal, right? Sometimes before we rush to think, often we have to sit with the fact that we all have a little superhuman, superwoman, superman complex where we think we're going to say the just right thing. Move yourself away from that. Sometimes support looks like following a page on about grief. It looks like listening to a podcast. It looks like, you know what, I can't do it. Let me connect that person to the person who can provide them the help, right? So think about all the ways in which we can enfranchise grief and really be one another. As I said, there are many, and we live in a digital age where, we have no excuses not to show up for each other. But I hope that within the context of culture, within the context of age and demographics and whatever it may be, within the context of spirituality and church, that we can show up for each other in real, authentic ways. So thank you all for listening. I invite you to stay connected. This is my organization, Anchor Grief. You can find us on anchorgrief.com. Instagram more heavily. I post a lot there, but also on Threads and X, which is formerly Twitter. Every once in a while, I have lectures and talks, and am doing something where I also invite you all to log in and be a part of that. So I'm going to hand it back over to Pastor Hay, and we're just going to facilitate our moment of questions and answers.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rashida, for this very well thought out and clearly communicated presentation on this subject matter of grief and the church. You know, someone once said that grief is the price we pay for love, and you clearly articulated how, you know, impactful this is. And you know, I was looking at a little bit of research and just to kind of buttress what you've been talking about so well, you know, according to the CDC, nearly 1 in 5 adults in the United States has experienced the death of a close loved one in the past year, contributing to rising mental health strain. And you talk about building the community, so important. The Harvard School of Public Health reports that social and spiritual isolation intensifies grief symptoms, while meaningful community support reduces long-term emotional distress by nearly 40%. And so when I sat here and hear you talk about how the community must enfranchise, the community must validate and be in that space and be with and walk alongside and companion in those who are going through challenging times. The research is showing that you are hitting the nail that we need to, as faith communities, really focus on that. Even Barna found that over 80% of grieving people say they, quote, turn to faith or spirituality in times of loss, but only 40% feel that church provides consistent support. So I gave this backdrop, Rashida, and I'm going to springboard into the question and answer segment. And please feel free to raise your hand, drop your question in the chat out there so we can engage Rashida. You know, this is a once in a long time event because, you know, she's very busy. While we have her here, we've got to get, you know, a little bit more out of her wisdom. But in light of what's happening and individuals responding, Rashida, that the church support is not consistent. I am wondering, from your experience, what are some of the things that churches could really do, faith communities could really do more or do better at? Not that they're not doing, because I know many churches are doing well. They've invited people like yourself, myself out there to support. But what could they do better, and where could they seek to improve a little better?
Right, a great question. And I also want to say, I see that there are just a few individuals on YouTube. I turn to it so I can see your live questions there too, so we don't miss anything. But most of us are within this space. Um, yes, it's so important to have that consistency. And I think we need to understand that grief is consistent, persistent, right? I find that a lot of faith communities and families in general, people in general, really think about a specific type of loss, really dependent on certain times during the year, especially around holiday time, right? So you'll see, for example, Mother's Day is coming up, and that's when you're like, oh my goodness, I know two people who experienced the death of their mother. And while that is wonderful, we have to think about, well, how can we have showed up for that person throughout the year, right? When it wasn't just that Sunday in May, when it wasn't just for Father's Day, or it just wasn't for, Thanksgiving, that we are showing up for individuals. So reaching out all throughout the year. And I know, because I am one of them. Some of us are just so inundated with so many things to do, it slips. It's not because we're purposely trying to forget individuals, but use the tools that are there for you. I have absolutely been known to know a death of someone within my faith community, within my church family. And I know that this day would forever be important for them. It may not be, because we're human, important for me 3 years down the line. But what I do is I go into my calendar and I set a reminder. Right. Also, making space for individuals and pulling it out from the front of the community, right? Not just thinking about, just the interpersonal conversations, but it's leadership thinking about this. I was so happy. I went to a church one time, and yes, it was around the holidays, but it was one of the first times I had heard a church say, "Hey, we are aware that many are grieving during this time." If you would like to talk about XYZ and reach out to someone, here is the number of the elder of the month, etc., whom you can reach out to about this. I myself, something that I have done, cannot bring my profession to my faith community, created a grief ministry. And some people think it's going to be like a heavy load. Well, first of all, that stigma, that taboo. So many individuals don't reach out. But I think it does do something for someone to know that your church has a flyer, has a grief ministry, that it was important enough to have something set aside in case people wanted to reach out. And what I do often through that ministry is every once in a while, because people are not readily coming to me, for example, I just hosted through my organization and through my church a grief and healing musical experience. Right. I know people would love music. They love to come to a concert, right? They may not be ready to have a one-on-one conversation, but so many individuals came to me afterwards and were in that space and who heard those messages of hope and who heard that music and just had time to meditate and think about their life, the way grief has changed their life, and they were so incredibly touched. Right. So those are just a few of the ways that I think about that we can show up, but consistency is key, right? Intrapersonally and also with the forward-facing message, it's how we show up for people.
I love that, and I love that, when you said that, churches could make this a part of their ministry, not just something on the back burner, but something that is integrated. It's a part of the holistic approach to ministry that they take. I love that. I see your hand, Floyd. You can go right ahead. We'll acknowledge you at this time. You can unmute and you can share your question, make your comments.
I hope I'm not sounding too excited when I say I love the presentation. And I was really blessed by it. And I just want to affirm my dear sister for her presentation and ask a very quick question. My question is, how do we distinguish between spiritual care and clinical care without devaluing either? And is it possible that sometimes we can go too far with spiritual care and try to replace clinical care?
Great question. Yes, it's a short answer. It's very much possible. I work with clients all the time, and that's why I say we have to be mindful of what messages our community present, right? And it's not a hurt that is often intentional, right? In trying to encourage people, we miss again that human aspect, or maybe we are a little further away from our painful moments, so we do not speak from the rawness of that moment. So sometimes in trying to encourage someone, we are throwing out scripture, we are saying things like that person is in a better place, we are and it just comes across as dismissive to the real pain that is in the moment, right? I think and I apply this myself, a good tactic to always take is to reflect back. It's a clinical skill, but useful in all settings, is to reflect back what the individual is saying, and to meet them where they're at. So if someone is dealing with loss and is grieving, and they have said, man, wow, I'm so glad that individual is out of their pain. They suffered a lot. They dealt with this illness for 2-3 years. I'm glad that they're out of that pain. In echoing them, may now say, I agree. I can certainly see how that's something that you would find relief in. However, the person has never mentioned that. Going to be in conversation with them and be sitting in their home and at whatever point they are in their grief and say, man, it must be a relief, or it's such a relief that they're no longer suffering. I don't know that that's what the person thinks. Right. And it will be better not to say anything than to be dismissive. Right. So be mindful of that. It's a clinical skill that we all should apply, but it's also a human to human skill. Pray for the individual, echo what they are saying, encourage them in other ways, right? It's better to encourage them with what and how you can help them now. I'm here to help you. Do you need someone to wash your kids? I'll be there Tuesday. Instead of overly worrying about the grief, right? What do they need in this moment? You need someone to print out or to help with that funeral program. I'm great at that. I'm going to design something for you. Right. These are the many other ways we can show up for people instead of thinking that verbally we're gonna say something that will be the ultimate aha.
And fascinating that you shared that, and interesting. I really believe that it is important to balance clinical and spiritual care. And I am of the persuasion that uh, it's really not to pit one against the other, because he asked the question, how much is too much or do you go over the line? I believe that it is important to see spiritual care as complementary and not competitive to the clinical work that happens out there. But also sometimes there may be the tendency, especially in spiritual realms, especially in a church setting, to try to function like you're a clinician. That is one of the challenges that individuals can face out there. If you are not trained in handling grief, do not approach it in a way as if you are a trained grief specialist. Get help outside of yourself. And I think that's so important. But I think it's more complementary. I think that's such a great question in light of what's happening in so many circles, and I love how you really balance that conversation. Someone in the chat made a statement. Let me see. It says, "This is so good. As a church, we need to be more present in supporting those who are grieving. This is indeed the human reality, and we need to be more compassionate. May God help us." Are there any other questions or comments out there? You can raise your hand, you can open your mic. The lines are open. I see VO. You can go right ahead. Your hand is raised, and we acknowledge you, followed by Pamela.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for this presentation. I have a question because I do know that some people, while some people would like to be like get comfort during their time of grief by others. There are others times where people don't want to be bothered. Like, for instance, I have a friend, she pretty much like shut herself off. And she lost her dad and her sister a couple months ago, 2 months apart. And so at first I'm like, okay, why, shouldn't this be the time as a Christian sister for her to want to cling to us and so we can pray with her and I find that she actually distanced herself during these times. And at first I kind of felt, a little bit like like offended. And I started to ask God, I started to pray and ask the Lord, like, I've never dealt with this. So please help me to learn how to handle what I'm dealing with now, because I thought it was like strange that, this person is pulling away as opposed to, coming together with people who are Christians and who she's been friends with. And so have you ever have to deal with people that themselves? They don't want to be bothered. I find myself praying for her even last night while I was sleeping. She came to my mind. I prayed for her. But I just kind of want to know, how do you deal with people when they're dealing with this part in when they're dealing with grief in this way, where they're distancing themselves?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for your transparency about feeling like, of course, and yes, I deal with this often. That's a big myth. Also, that people will run to the communities that they have always been a part of. Grief is very jarring. All of those losses have taken place. I can only imagine, with that compounded loss. So that is, almost back to back, because 2 months is nothing time wise. That is really almost back to back, and all of those secondary losses there. Absolutely a great starting point to pray, continue to pray. And also I find that it's so helpful to pray not only for your friend, but to also pray not for that friend to come seeking after the community, but instead to find community, even if it is not with you, to find those spaces where she maybe can open up and speak to what is changing, and also, even if it's not maybe verbal, but also is able to find the ways in which she can cope in this moment, you know? So pray for that. That's important. And also, along the thread of that consistency, right? Doesn't mean if somebody isolate themselves, I know it's a human tendency within us to want to withdraw and to say, they're not appreciative, they don't care, they don't want me to bother them. But you would be surprised at the amount of people I speak to who say, I know this person is thinking of me, because every once in a while they'll text and they'll say just that, you know, where it's not like you're texting to get something. That's not what it's about. It's okay to just be in contact, to show your support with no strings attached. I have clients whom their friends and family may have been inviting them to large gatherings for years. And I have worked with them in saying, I fully intend to come one day, but this is another year where I just can't make it, right? And communicating both ways. So let alone at 2 months, so much is going on. Continue to support in that way. I say text, I say reaching out digitally because it's something that can easily be seen. Sometimes people find it hard to go through voicemails, and to listen. Sometimes they get backed up because so many people are calling, but hopefully that's being seen. And plus that prayer, keep reaching out consistently.
Rashida, there in my years pastoring congregations, working in healthcare in a chaplaincy setting, I I have come to the realization that when someone withdraws during grief, my goal or my role isn't to fix this distance in behavior, right? Because there's this tendency, as you highlight, this tendency to fix. But I believe it's important to create safe conditions that allow connections, that allow healing and trust to gradually re-emerge. Because let's face it, grief is messy. Grief is messy and it is challenging. And when people are going through, they're going through. And so one of the things that I have tried to do is to just offer presence without pressure, which is so powerful. I've had times when I just send a text to someone and say, listen, thinking of you, no need to respond. No need to respond to me, basically, because it kind of just dial it down a little bit and help them to just be
Right.
just making those gentle check-ins. It's so important. And when they are ready, which is so important, you are highlighting that piece of when they are ready, they will respond in their time, on their turf, on their terms. And I think that is so important for us to underscore and just being very, very supportive and in there.
I'd also love, to challenge some of our thinkings on this subject particularly, because something that we don't think about is, what about the person that does show up all the time
Yes. Yeah.
and still wants to volunteer and
Mhm.
still wants to lead that ministry and still showing up? And so, and how that also can be problems. So many individuals are not ready to be in those spaces, but there may be an avoidance that's happening, right? An avoidance of maybe thinking about their grief and wanting to fill up their time and being outside of the home and not want, whatever it may be. So just because we see someone who is perhaps showing up, it does not mean that they are doing better in their grief than someone else. So many people are present with us in community and are weeping in their cars away from the community. So keep that in mind.
Yes, yes, so true, so true. I'm gonna go to Pamela and thank you, VO, for that question. I thought that was such a great question. Whatever they're feeling, it's okay. There's no timeline for grief. We're gonna go to Pamela, and then I have Dr. Vivia and Donalyn. I see you also ready and lined up for questions. Go right ahead, Pamela. Let's have you.
Good evening, good night, everyone. I must start by saying that this was an amazing presentation, one that I needed. Not sure if all the areas, but I just want to give a backdrop of my situation and where I'm at right now and to see the recommendation. So 2023 would have been my year of losing family members. If my memory serves me right, I made around 10 trips to Jamaica. And these are from like cousins went to bed and just did not wake up. My cousin's going to be buried. His father went to bed the night before the funeral, died in his sleep. To an aunt getting a stroke, died a few months. But the one that really still bothers me is a cousin that was killed, 42 years of age. He got a promotion and, they hired someone to go on his job to kill him. He was shot twice. And I was like really organizing with God for his life, like really asking God to, just to spare his life. And I think it was a Friday morning. I know my brother went to see him and, I woke up, no energy, but hoping for the best, even with the news I got the night before. And, the next phone call I get the Friday morning, he was gone. And it still hurts like it just happened. And I think what make it even like it was just I think there's too much one behind the other. So I am not sure if I have had the opportunity to really grieve any of these like very close family member tragic situation. My cousin, 33 years old, she was in remission with breast cancer. The next thing, my cousin just buried the one they killed. I'm still in Jamaica. The news came the morning. I see it on Facebook. Jody died. I'm like, no way. Jody's gone. And then my adopted sister went to the hospital in Spalding. She had high blood pressure and they didn't take care of her in time. And right there. And I'm talking about a month and two into, so at times I still feel a bit consumed, especially about Dean. Like nothing seems to make sense. And I think the worst part is like someone at my church, when I was going back and forth, and a church sister looked at me and said to me, how will your family do so? Like, not even much as to say, boy, sis, this is like your 11, 12 family members. But she was like asking, what did my family do for these things to be happening? So I am struggling. I don't think I get to grieve, and I think it takes a toll on my health. I'm not sure if I even said it to Pastor Hay that going to one of the funerals, I passed out on the flight. It was very serious. Just God's grace and mercy. Everything is just like consuming. And then so when I see what's going on now and watch the video with that gentleman in Minnesota, now that brings me back. And it is killing me inside. Like all I am thinking about is Dean, 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 Dean. So I want to know what would have been your recommendation to me, because sometimes I'm in church and there's a song playing and I feel like I want to run out. Like I don't want to hear that. This is the month that everything would have happened, so it's like everything is just fresh back in my head. It's a lot. I've lost so many persons since 2023, like between my family, church family. It is a lot, and I think it's affecting my health. Now have chronic hives, and the doctor is saying it's everything is like, so I don't, just tell me what do I need to do, because it's consuming me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. And I absolutely want to take the moment and recognize that it is a lot. It is. Um, it's compounded loss, thereby making it a compounded grief. Um, and this wasn't our topic today, but absolutely, being and experiencing other griefs can trigger many other losses in your lifetime and bring that to minds. I encourage you, because as we have said tonight, it's not one or the other. Right. I encourage you, if you have not done so, to seek out a therapeutic relationship, to seek out some place where you may really have the space to be able to speak to the losses that are coming up for you, what has impacted you, how it has impacted you, and also to think about the ways in which you are coping or not coping in this moment. Because we all know that there is a great reality of what you said, of how sometimes you feel like you can barely catch your breath in grief, but also there are many other responsibilities. Some of us are still expected to show up at work and do things seamlessly, or have to show up for our families in a particular way, and keep going as if things were normal, and they're not. They will not be normal. There, every time someone dies and there's grief, something new that's developing. So seek out a therapeutic relationship if you can. I always say to people, go to your insurance, find out what it's for if you have that, etc. So that it's more affordable to you. But also, think about the ways in which you cope, right? Think about the ways in which major stressors show up for you, right? What are the negative things, the coping mechanisms that you have that may not be so great? And also, what are the positive things that you can continue to intentionally apply and do, right? How can you make sure that you're eating right? How can you make sure that your sleep hygiene is appropriate for this moment that you in, even in early grief, that is a wacky, the sleep hygiene can be, how it is that, friends and family can show up for you, or you can be in spaces with them and receive support. And also think about the things and how you want to spend your personal time, and how much you want to be able to attend to your grief, right? Is it journaling? There's a great journal, and I'll put it in the chat momentarily. It's called How to Carry What Can't Be Fixed. And it's like an adult journal, not just blank pages, right? But every day takes you through something. It takes you through just writing a little, thinking through some grief, and aspects of what your grief journey has been, right? So there are things like that you can do. Some people are not really journalists or whatever it may be, but it helps them. They're readers, they're the intellectualizers, or they listen to podcasts, right? So really finding out what is helpful for you in this moment and leaning into those things, leaning into those things. So I hope that, just a, again, overview, but I hope that is helpful in this moment and dealing with that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. And just know you are in our thoughts, and that's a lot for anyone to go through.
Yes.
And thanks for being vulnerable with us in this space. Dr. Viv, Dr. Vivia, you are up next with your question.
Yes, thank you so much for this presentation. It was very thought-provoking. And it was along the same lines as that Sister Pamela was talking, but I wanted to find out from you, how can the church help individuals who are experiencing compounded grief? Because I have also been through that in the past 2, 3 years, where I've had in our family, cousins, mother, brother, is dead 6 months apart from each other, and dealing with planning of the funeral and all of those things. When you have to be involved or take lead position in these situations, you tend not to get a chance to really grieve as you would want to. And as a church, sometimes we will see individuals that are experiencing these multiple losses back to back, but there's no support that is provided by the church to these individuals. How can we as a church do better when it comes to compounded grief, and to assist these individuals as they go through, and to kind of give them some form of acceptance and support so that they can grieve healthily.
Yes, thank you for the questions. The support is necessary, right? Of course, meeting the individual where they at, uh, finding out what they are in need of. Sometimes individuals are able to tell you a little further into their grief journey what they need. But especially at the beginning, I think it's important to meet some of the practical needs that they may have. You know, every church is of different sizes, and financially, some individual may be a blessing. There's a gift of being a giver too, you know, and you may not be the great the person with the words, and you may not be the poet of the group, but you can be the check writer of the group, or the person who zells, or the person who organizes childcare, the person who organizes meal for a longer period of time, instead of just, bringing all the meals in the first week. The person who may organize some visits, the person who may be calling and speaking to that individual. Um, and just making sure that they have a network of persons whom they can transparently speak to about what they are going through, right? Depending on how or what the role of the individual who died was, it may be everything from very minute, they really didn't live with you, perhaps they have their own spouse, to huge, someone who was within your own household, someone whom you are still seeing their favorite couch or their favorite seat. We have to be open and offer our help with the many ways that people need it. Sometimes that looks like helping you reorganize. Sometimes that's coming to your house and helping you box things up so that you can get through some clutter and be able to give things to the Goodwill, or sometimes that is a helping hand if you are going to move because you're no longer able to afford your residence or whatever it may be, right? Sometimes that it's the unexpected. Sometimes it's a little pocket money because someone would absolutely love to still keep the cell phone number of their beloved for a while without getting it cut off, right? Without having the extra bill of a line. That's something you can easily say, hey, I'll do that for 3 months. I'll cover that line or whatever it may be. So, there's a plethora of ways that we can show up. I think it's important to ask, but it's also important to be watchful, to be mindful, to be prayerful in the ways that we approach things so that we're able to really meet people where they are. And practicality is so key in that. Everyone needs something different. So we have to be mindful and watchful there.
Yes, I think practicality is so powerful. And Rashida, it the question that Dr. Viv raised, is so poignant, because we show up for church every week or every day, depending on your context. And a lot of grieving people, they hide their pain. They hide their pain when they feel the church really expects strength or positivity. And sometimes there's that subculture there, even within organizations. And I really think it's important for us as church leaders to create this ministry culture that you spoke about earlier, that this should not be some secondary part of ministry. This is primary. We are dealing with human beings, and they will grieve and they will go through challenging moments. So creating a ministry culture that acknowledges compound grief. I think it's important. I've pastored congregations, I still speak, and it is imperative for us as speakers and pastors and chaplains to speak on subjects of this nature. When was the last time you went and heard a sermon on grief and loss? When was the last time you heard a practical message dealing with these challenges? So I think it's important for us to really create that ministry culture. I think also it's important for us to create safe spaces for storytelling. I'm big on creating spaces for storytelling so individuals can ventilate, because losses overlap. People need places and they need spaces to process the various layers, the things that are happening. And the church can offer and should offer grief circles. You know, it was heartwarming for me to go to a congregation like you and to hear that that is happening. It's very good, and more of our churches could do that. You know, provide listening rooms. There are so many trained individuals in our churches. You would be surprised at how many therapists and counselors are sitting right there in the congregation, but aren't mobilized to provide effective support. And so, if you find that there is a challenge in the church, you know, step up sometimes and be the answer to some of these struggles. But you're naming a real issue, and it's significant that we address it, and we, as a church community, we focus on caring for the vulnerable and those who are going through compound grief. So just simple, we're scratching the surface here, as Rashida said initially. By no means can we exhaust the subject matter of grief, and we want to thank you all for your thoughts and your perspectives. Let me just keep myself honest with the chat before we wrap things up. I see in the chat out here, I'm just going to go from bottom up. In many cases, it helps to give the news and social media a break, because this can definitely add to our grief. In this age of technology, many of us are carrying more than we should carry. I do agree. There is another person uh, who who stated in the chat, yes, it's good to just hold space for that person. Also, it's important to check up and observe even from a distance, because grief can lead to depression and other mental health issues. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Uh, Donnelly, thank you. Donnelly, your hand was up and your mic was open. Don't want to overlook you. Go right ahead and you can share.
I know you're pressed for time, so I'll be very brief. I also experienced grief last year. I lost my daughter. She was 26. And a month after, I lost my mother. And I was just adding to something that my sister said in relation to tangible things. Sometimes it's not what we say. I just wanted to share an experience that stood out most for me during that time. I remember going to church and I sat in the congregation, and the sister just simply came over and out. She said nothing. Her arms were wrapped around me right through, and it was the most comforting feelings. And sometimes it's not even what we just say. And I also just wanted to say something to the other person that spoke about her friend that just keep her distance. I think to some extent I went through that, not because I was depressed. I just needed a little personal space to process and pray through what I was going through at that time and still going through. Because what I realized with grief, there are times you're okay. There are times it's just a little song or a word or something that bring back recollection, and it put you back in that space. And for me personally, it's like in everything I try to pray my way through. So as it comes up, it's like it's a prayer, Lord. I started telling God exactly how I feel. But one of the things that concerned me, and I think it was addressed, but if that information could be given again because I got on late, is that through my journey, I truly wondered how equipped the church is to really deal with persons who go through grief. And I am so thankful that I heard. I think it is something that need to be, our members need to be educated as to some awareness, because especially in the time that we're living in, we're seeing more of what is happening, persons losing their loved ones, and the church on a whole is grieving and reacting, and person just need to know that their voice are heard and their feelings are understood. And I personally like to know the resources that are available, not only to myself, but where I can also help somebody else who is going through that process of grief.
Then again, thank you so much. I extend my deepest condolences to you. And many have shared their personal experience tonight and felt heard and validated. And it's proven in what we've said, right? The unspoken and also the spoken things that comfort. You know, Definitely, I think it's important to be heard more formally through ministries, through creating space, but also through connecting. I know that we all may be on at different areas or, in different states. Um, be mindful, even in your community, where there may be support groups, where there is a hospice program, which usually provides bereavement care for not only the individuals within hospice, but for community as well. Organizations and clinical settings that have support groups that, therapists who may be accepting individuals in a variety of different plans. For those who are working, have not typed into their EAP, their employee benefits, see what that says about grief and sometimes we wait till we sprain something and then we know how much occupational therapy or physical therapy we can get but we never maybe seek out the mental health services that we can be a part of. um, Also there are a few, especially for you, Donalyn, there's everything from more local organizations that specifically have groups and supports for those that have experienced the death of a child. Compassionate Friends is one of them that has support groups nationwide. Bereaved Parents of the United States, if just do a Google search, those have groups nationwide. And I'm not sure if anyone is in the Northeast or in the area. I know the organization that I have worked for as well, COPE, Bereavement Center of Westchester, etc. They have some groups and supports. So begin with the resources that the internet can give, right? And finding out some things that may be helpful in your area. And like Pastor Hayes said, there may be other professionals just among you in the church who can connect you to those services. I know, like I said, follow my page. This is not for self-promotion, but I often, just repost anything that I see for free, because I want things to be of little cost as much to the community as they can be. So anything that I see out there through grief, any workshops, etc., that are especially are virtual, where people can log in from all over the United States and outside of the country, I just post those and people can choose to, be a part if they have time in their schedule. So those are just some of the things that we can do. You know, um,
Yes.
Resources, references, print them out. This is something I did in my church. We had the event the other day. I didn't go home with all the resources. I left them out on self-care, on grief, on the manifestations of grief, on whatever. Those are things that, again, we never know who may be walking by and say, wow, this is just what I needed.
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons we're having this conversation tonight, because a ministry such as this, Donalyn, that focuses on prayer, health, and spirituality, has been seeking to really empower and support individuals. This ministry that you are sitting in this room right now, that is facilitating this program, is focused on providing that kind of emotional, spiritual support. They meet every day If you're looking for a safe space to be, they meet every morning, every evening, 7 days per week for prayer, for conversations like this one, where there are individuals from all over. We come together, we support one another, we empower each other. So this is a great opportunity. And this is why we're having these conversations, because this question has come up before, like, where can I go? I need support. And in addition to starting with that Google search and right where you are, there are individuals who are kind of just clasping hands across the globe. Because with technology, we can have Rashida on the East Coast, I'm way down south, and individuals are together in the space. We're learning, we're sharing, we're growing, and we're listening. And yes, personal presence is so important, and we want to just encourage you to start where you are. Find that support, but there are people who are doing great work out there supporting individuals who are going through challenging times. We want to thank you all for coming in this room tonight. And as we prepare to close, we want to just say thank you, Rashida. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I know we cannot exhaust the subject. I know there'll be time, more and more instances and occasions for us to reflect more on grief and how we're dealing with this most important part of our experience. And I just want to say thank you. Appreciate you so much for your time and your effort. And so many of you who have come on in the Zoom room, those who are on YouTube, we encourage you to please join us. Every Sunday, we're having these conversations. And for the whole month of February, we're talking about grief. And next Sunday, I'll be facilitating this entire session for this month. We are having a chaplain. There'll be a chaplain in the room, a chaplain's reflection on grief. So you're going to hear from the perspective of a chaplain working in healthcare, her own personal journey to kind of just help you to know that you are not alone. And so as we pause this evening, I want to share with you the words of this poetic piece. It is beautiful, and I think I want to just share a little bit on this as we close tonight. And it simply said, "You sit with us, you're never absent. You're a part of our existence. We never, ever get over you, but we learn to walk with you and make meaning in the midst of you. Grief, I know you are here, and I know I am touched by you, and I know the divine is beside us and deeply cares." And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know this evening that as I've said before, grief is the price we pay for love. We never get over. We are able to really make sense and have a better understanding and reconciliation with our grief, but it will be with us. And the information shared this evening is in an effort to help and to support us and to educate and empower us as we journey through this life. Just know that we care, we're thinking about you, and I see requests in the chat. I'm going to pray at this time as we close our time together. Let us pray. Everlasting Father, we are so grateful to you in this moment for being the God who weeps with us, for the one who is touched with the feelings of our infirmities. While you were here on earth, you wept. You went through challenging moments, and you understand. In this space tonight, are individuals who are going through grief, and those who support them, and those who are struggling and those who are making meaning. We thank you for all of your people. We know that you see us and you care. We pray in a very special way tonight for the requests. We pray for those who shared their stories, vulnerable moments in this conversation. We ask you to watch over them. We pray for your comfort. We pray for your healing. And we pray above all that you'd grant us grace to continue. We thank you tonight for every person in this room. We thank you tonight that you're watching over us and you will never leave us alone. Walk with us through the days and the weeks and the months ahead. Bind up our wounds, heal our broken hearts, and may we know that one of these days, suffering and pain will be no more. But while we live in the here and now, thank you for the help you've sent in persons like Rashida, who every single day pour out herself, caring for humanity. Thank you for the chaplains and the pastors and the leaders and the health professionals and the church members who are seeking to make a difference. Watch over us and keep us safe. And may you fill us with your love and your grace, is my prayer. Amen and amen. Thank you all ever so much for joining us this evening. We want you to know that we will be in this room 7 in the morning, 7 in the evening, 7 days per week. Something is happening in this room. The same way you got on with that same Zoom code, it's live 7 a.m., 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we are so delighted. You can also go to the website of the 777 Prayer and Health Ministries. If you need to contact someone, there's a number on the screen. If you need to support, there are ways that you can do that. We're delighted that you could come and join us. Thank you again, Rashida, for your presence in this room. And as we go, we want to go with the assurance that the God of hope will fill our hearts with hope and peace and love and joy. And he promises that he will never leave us alone. He will always be there with and for us. From all of us here, the 777 Prayer and Health Ministries, thank you so much. We want to say to you, good night. There's a beautiful song that a friend of mine, when I was going through a time of great grief, losing my mom, losing my brothers, tragically, they sent me this beautiful song, and it says, "The flowers will bloom. The flowers will bloom." And it's a beautiful song that was done with the great tsunami that impacted there in the East. And so I just want you to listen and be blessed by this beautiful one. Good night, everyone, and peace be unto you. See you soon.
My heart goes out to you when the winter snows give way to spring. My heart is longing now, longing for the town where happiness had been a place of hope and of dreaming too, been a home where my heart always went back to you. But for now, I only dream of the people who I loved and knew. Someone is singing, I can hear, singing now. Someone is weeping, I can feel their tears. Someone is smiling, showing me why in hell to tears for all that was lost. Someone is leading you to love that they sought, asking you to love all that you love the most. Flowers will bloom, yes they will, yes they will, for you who are here or yet to be born. They'll bloom, yes they will, and they'll bloom again until there's no missing sorrow and no reason left to mourn. Flowers will bloom, yes they will, for you who are here or yet to be born. They'll bloom, yes they will, and they'll bloom again until there's no missing sorrow and no reason left to mourn. Flowers will bloom, yes they will, for you who are here or yet to be born. They'll bloom, yes they will, and they'll bloom again until you live and remember and love us forevermore.
Thanks for joining the 777 Prayer and Health Ministries, where we pray on the promises of prayer and trust in Him who is omnipotent. Join us daily via Zoom using the Zoom code 813-1521-5055 when we pray, praise, and ground our faith on the sure promises to God. Go to 777prayerconference.org to sign up for our email list, to submit a prayer request, or to listen to a recording from our archive. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at 777 Prayer and Health Ministries. Until next time, remember that prayer changes things, people, and circumstances. So, dear listener, pray on.